Hello, this is Don Davis with the Positive Psychology Leadership Group. I'd like to start a new thing this year, something like a book club. What kind of books do I read? I tend to read books in the area of my research program, so things like humility, gratitude, forgiveness, religion and spirituality. And then I also like reading books on leadership, things related to cultural change, how to create changes within social systems, changes in businesses, or changes in local social context. So over time, I'll pose some questions and talk about some of the things that I'm learning and I think might be useful for us. The general format will be that I'll describe the essence of the idea. I'll try to distill things down. And it's usually something that I haven't quite figured out what I think. I'm kind of mulling it over and sorting it through, and I'm wanting to get a few different perspectives. And so I'll frame some questions. And then what I thought I would do, I'll pose a few different questions. And if people have a thought that they'd like to contribute for that week, they can just call my number. This is, it won't ring my phone. It's just a Google number. So you'll go straight to voicemail. You have up to 3 minutes to describe what you're thinking about. And so if y'all are up for trying that out, I think that might be an interesting thing to do this year. And it'll give us a little bit of a breadcrumbs trail of some of the things that we've been talking about and learning about as a group. And it will also give new members a way of kind of catching up on some of the conversations that we're having. So I think that could end up being pretty helpful. So the first book that I wanted to talk about is Jim Collins's book on the flywheel effect. This is a pretty short book. I listened to it on Audible, but it actually ties together a lot of the other books that he's written. And it got me looking at his website, which is very well done. A lot of very useful resources, well organized. You can tell he's an excellent teacher. It's got some different assessments that people can use. And then he's got all the audio organized, all his video organized. He's got a variety of different articles that he's written all in one place. So I actually first heard about the flywheel principle from Brad Owens, who is a humility researcher. He's at Brigham Young University, and he did his postdoctoral work at Michigan University, which is a major kind of business program. And Brad's kind of spearheaded some of the most prestigious work on humility and leadership. He's got a number of publications in the top tier outlet, Journal of Applied Psychology. Has an impact factor of somewhere around 10 last time I checked. But he kind of gave me the brief version of this metaphor is what it is. And so the idea is that it can kind of take a lot of energy to get a flywheel moving. It's kind of maybe initially like one click at a time. You get it moving and it's slow at first, but then as you kind of keep the momentum going and you keep turning, you keep doing the next thing, you keep turning, all of a sudden the momentum starts to build and build and build. And then it really starts moving and the momentum just kind of carries itself, and every bit of extra energy that you're putting in gets it moving faster and faster. So this is his analogy for what happens in highly productive companies when they really kind of get at the heart of their strategy. And he's got all sorts of strategy related components. It's actually well organized on his website. Like one of them is the hedgehog principle, kind of finding what you're passionate about, what matches something that you could be one of the best people in the world at. And then the third component is something where there's a resource stream. So that's his hedgehog principle. So he's got about 15 or 20 of these strategy related things. But when things kind of really come together, either for a person or a group, what happens is they work strategically, they work hard in a way where the success they have leads to something happening that facilitates further success, and they end up capitalizing on a positive upward cycle. His example is Amazon. And so when this gets going, there are usually about 5 or 6 components that kind of build on each other. And then once you kind of get around the circle, it causes another loop, basically. So I don't remember the details with Amazon, but the general gist is as they improve what they're doing and capture more market share, they're driving down prices because of economies of scale, which then helps them deliver an even better product and capture even more of the market. And so round and round they go. The part that I think would be interesting for our group is to think about what is the flywheel for a writer in psychology? How does it work? Because we're actually not in an area where there's a whole lot of innovation in how the structure of an academic job works. There's room for innovation in the area of theory. There's room for innovation in terms of learning new methods and possibly statistical approaches. But in terms of the way the structure of the university works, that part is, at least for now, somewhat regimented. So we actually ought to be able to talk to different people who have managed to kind of form their own personal flywheel or form kind of a flywheel related to their research team or their research network, and begin to see what that kind of chain of 5 or 6 things might be where success kind of breeds additional success. So that's kind of what I was wanting to draw from him. The other thing I wanted to highlight for folks was I listened to an interview with Collins by Tim Ferriss, and it was actually really interesting. It's always kind of cool to just hear people's stories and just kind of hear what it looks like for someone who is kind of a prolific writer and has had a career that a lot of people have wanted to learn from. Some of the decision points and how those ended up kind of informing their own lives and their own personal decisions. And I do want to highlight 2 parts of that. I'll link to his podcast in that particular session. But the 2 parts, one was he talked about this process that he did where he had 3 stopwatches. And this is probably a little nerdy. And of course, I thought it was pretty cool. I could see myself doing something similar, particularly the part where he was kind of tracking his time with an Excel spreadsheet. So that's definitely me. At some point I'll show y'all my planning spreadsheet. But what he ended up saying was he actually had cut down from 3 to 1 stopwatch. So he used to track 3 things: his creative time, how much time he spent writing, his teaching, and everything else. And so what he wanted to do was give about 50% to creative time, 30% to teaching, 20% to everything else. But then he realized he really only needed to track the creative time. And his principle for this is the 20-mile march. So that's kind of, I guess probably harkens back to like military days, or, people who want to hike the Appalachian Trail before winter or whatever. The goal is to just kind of hit a rhythm of getting a certain number of miles in. And if you do that, you will cover a certain amount of ground over a period of time. So what he does is he tracks his creative time. He counts, use the analogy of getting the brushes out. So he counts some of the preparatory work. His goal is to hit 1,000 hours in any given year. So at any point where he pulls the last 365 days, he wants to stay above 1,000, which kind of functions in 2 ways. One, if he's dipping in certain periods of time, he has a way of giving himself feedback around that. The other part is it gives a way of seeing if he has some latitude. If he has a couple of months where he's really putting in a lot of time, he's kind of given himself a longer term perspective to see kind of how much energy is being put into creative work. But the general idea is if there's not a consistent flow and application of energy, then, it's going to be hard to keep the flywheel going, to use that analogy. And then the other thing that I thought was kind of cool, and I kind of want to try this part out too, is he didn't do a lot, but he wrote a few things about the day, kind of high points in terms of memory. And then he would rate the day in terms of his sense of, I guess, accomplishment or well-being, on a scale of -2 to 2. And the point was to be able to look at, in particular, the -2 days, what kind of things were disrupting his sense of purpose and well-being, and then what kind of things were happening on the 2 days. And he was able to, by doing that, start to see some consistent patterns. Like for him, and this could be different for different people, for him, a really good day had one or two things happening. He gets to get involved in deep, focused work, flow state work, immersed, losing a sense of time, just really into the creative work. Or the second was to be able to spend high quality time with people in his life, his family, his friends, close colleagues. And so those were the 2 things that were most consistently linked for him with the sense of, okay, that's a 2 on the scale from -2 to +2. So what I want to leave us with is this question of what are the pieces of a flywheel? Like, how are we trying to put this together? What does this look like in our group? What does it look like maybe even in a progression if the typical student is going to be here for 4 years and then internship? And then, kind of imagine even spanning that out. So there's 6 more years pre-tenure. What would a map look like of the first 10 years? What would it look like to do a pretty good job getting the flywheel going. If you were to kind of imagine 3 or 4 cycles through of this process of kind of hard work, working wisely, leading to positive benefits, what would that be? I think I've seen something somewhat similar happen with, for example, Vanessa. She seemed to, as she got into the last couple of years, and especially as she finished her school counseling degree, it seemed like pretty much every scholarship she wrote was getting funded. Why? What was happening? Saw something similar happening with Elise. She seems to have kind of hit a certain stride. In fact, that reminds me of another thing that he talks about is the concept of shooting bullets first before firing a cannon. And so the idea there is you kind of calibrate with small investments. And then once you know you're kind of onto something, you put everything into, you kind of invest everything in one shot, So in this regard, I actually think our leadership team has done some things like that. I'm curious to hear other people's thoughts on what are some of the things that we're kind of tinkering with, trying out. And I guess as we move into a planning session for the next year, I'm curious what you think might be worth, a Collins movement from firing bullets to shooting a cannon. Like, where would we potentially say we're onto something here, and what would it mean for us to invest more energy in one of these areas? And then I guess the other question that's probably worth asking is, are there some areas where we've invested a little bit and it turns out return on investment isn't that good? Maybe we don't need to keep doing some of these things. Which I guess, as I think about it, raises the question, how are we evaluating whether something is a good investment? That's probably something that I could use some feedback on. So, as you can see, just this 2-hour book has definitely gotten me thinking. I mean, part of the reason why is Collins integrated like 6 of his books into one 2-hour monograph. So he really kind of connected how his different books fit together. So it was very good.